Welcome to Liminal Journeys. I'm your host, Easton Sanders. Imagine a world that exists just beyond the edge of our reality. A world where the impossible is possible and the extraordinary is ordinary. A place where the rules of logic and reason are bent and anything is possible. Join us as we explore the liminal spaces between reality and imagination, where the boundaries of what's possible are pushed to their limits. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Liminal Journeys. You know, I love gardening. I like growing plants in general. It's not just vegetables. I like growing flowers, and I enjoy planting trees. Last year, I planted several apple trees and a peach tree, and sadly, none of them made it thanks to our rambunctious deer, but I am looking forward to trying again this year. That's why I was excited to learn about our next topic, man-eating plants. And when I say man-eating plants, I don't mean your vegetarian friend enjoying a salad. I mean actual plants consuming people. The earliest report I could find of a man-eating plant comes from the 1874 edition of the New York World newspaper. In the paper, an Edmund Spencer publishes a letter from German botanist and adventurer Carl Lecce. In the letter, Lecce gives his account of a sacrifice he witnessed to a man-eating tree in Madagascar. I won't read the full letter here, but I will give you the basic rundown. Lecce initially talks about his hesitancy to go due to rumors he's heard about the Mkodo tribe that lives in the region. However, he is eventually talked into traveling there after he was essentially told that his concerns with the tribe were unfounded. Once in Madagascar, Lecce describes going on a journey with the tribe into the jungles to the famous tree. They find themselves in a valley with a lake he describes as having sluggish, oily waters and being filled with alligators. The surrounding jungle was reported to be filled with cheetahs and venomous snakes, so this was no easy journey. They continue following a path into the thick forest, when eventually the natives begin hollering for Lecce, alerting him to the tree. The tree is described as looking like an 8-foot-tall pineapple, with a trunk apparently as hard as iron. The tree has 8 leaves that hang down to the ground, described as looking like agave. The face of the leaves have a thick set of thorny hooks. On top of the tree, he says there was a round white receptacle, not a flower, but a bowl-like feature of the tree that was filled with a sweet-tasting clear liquid that would cause you to become violently intoxicated if you drank it. Slightly under the bowl, there was a series of 7 to 8 feet long green and hairy tentacles that stretched out in every direction. It also had another series of tentacles he describes as like palpi that were constantly in motion and pointing toward the sky. He describes the movement making him shudder because of its appearance resembling snakes. Lecce says his examination of the tree was cut short due to the natives beginning to dance around the tree, shrieking and chanting hymns to the great tree devil. He then reports that the natives surrounded one of the women before urging her with their javelins to climb the tree and drink from the bowl. She does this. She climbs up the tree, she drinks the liquid, and then he says a crazed look overtook her face, and her limbs began convulsing. The tree then came to life, and Lecce describes the tree as moving with the fury of starved serpents grabbing around her neck and arms to strangle her, all before the lower tentacles slowly closed at the top, encasing the woman. After encasing the woman, Lecce says a thick mix of the honey-like liquid and blood trailed down the tree. And what happens next is just weird. The natives then surrounded the tree and drank the liquids, which apparently sent them into a mad state of mind. The story was quite popular and shared a lot in its time after its appearance in the New York World newspaper. Matter of fact, this is interesting. In 1924, former Michigan Governor Chase Osborne published a book all about the tree. Now, most of the book, titled Madagascar, Land of the Man-Eating Tree, describes other aspects of the island. However, the first chapter he discusses the tree and shares his best evidence, which seems to just be a later copy of the same letter. Of course, most people do believe the story to be fiction, and from what I understand, there isn't much more, if any, information available on Lecce aside from this story. But still, I thought this was interesting. I really liked the story. I thought it was very entertaining. I liked the aspect of the sacrifice to the tree, and something else that's kind of outlined in the story is the fact that these natives don't have a religion, and their closest concept with God is the devil tree. It's just very fascinating. Another story about a man-eating plant that I found comes from the book Sea and Land, written by James Buell in 1889. Here's the entire account as presented in his book. Travelers have told us of a plant which they assert grows in Central Africa and also in South America that's not contented with the myriad of large insects which it catches and consumes, but its voracity extends to making even humans its prey. This marvelous vegetable minotaur is represented as having a short, thick trunk, from the top of which radiate giant spines, narrow and flexible, but of extraordinary tenaciousness, the edges of which are armed with barbs or dagger-like teeth. Instead of growing upright or at an inclined angle from the trunk, these spines lay their outer ends upon the ground, and so gracefully are they distributed that the trunk resembles an easy couch with green drapery around it. The unfortunate traveler, ignorant of the monstrous creation which lies in his way, and curious to examine the strange plant or to rest himself upon its inviting stalk, approaches without a suspicion of his certain doom. The moment his feet are set within the circle of the horrid spines, they rise up like gigantic serpents and entwine themselves about him until he is drawn upon the stump, when they speedily drive their daggers into his body and thus complete the massacre. The body is crushed until every drop of blood is squeezed out of it and becomes absorbed by the gore-loving plant, when the dry carcass is thrown out and the horrid trap set again. A gentleman of my acquaintance who for a long time resided in Central America affirms the existence of such a plant as I have here briefly described, except that instead of the filaments or spines resting on the ground, he says they move themselves constantly in the air, like so many huge serpents in an angry discussion, occasionally darting from side to side as if striking at an imaginary foe. When their prey comes within reach, the spines reach out with wonderful sagacity, if I may be allowed to apply the expression to a vegetable creature, and grasp it in an unyielding embrace from whence it issues only when all of the substance of its body is yielded up. In its action of exerting pressure upon its prey, this dreadful plant resembles the instrument used in the Dark Ages for inflicting a torturous death. It was made of 2 long iron cylinders, on the inside of which were sharp, projecting spikes. The victim was placed inside, and the two cylinders then brought forcibly together, thus driving 100 or more of the pointed spikes into all parts of his body and producing a frightful death. Generally, this inquisitorial instrument was made somewhat crudely to represent a woman, hence the name applied to it was the Maiden, by which it is still known. Dr. Antonio Jose Marquez, a distinguished gentleman of the city of Barranquilla in the United States of Colombia, in describing this wonderful plant to the author, affirms that when excited, it violently agitates its long tentacle-like stems, the edges of which, rasping upon each other, produce a hissing noise which resembles the Spanish expression "ya te veo," the literal translation of which is "I see you." The plant is therefore known in South America by the name "ya te veo." He further asserts that so poisonous are the stems that if the flesh of any animal be punctured by the sharp barbs, a rapidly eating ulcer immediately forms, for which there is no known antidote, and death speedily ensues. It is a singular thing, and much to be deplored if such a voracious plant exists, that we can find no description of it in the most elaborate works on botany, and yet hundreds of responsible travelers declare they have frequently seen it, and not only watched it when in a normal condition, but one African explorer declares he once witnessed the destruction of a native who was accidentally caught by one. It has also been asserted that in the Fan country of Africa, criminals and those convicted of practicing witchcraft are sometimes fed alive to this man-eating plant. All of which, however, I am inclined to doubt. Not that there is no foundation for such statements as travelers sometimes make about this astonishing growth, but that the facts are greatly exaggerated. Our last story, titled "The Vampire Vine," was written about in the 1891 edition of the publication Review of Reviews by editor William Thomas Stead. Stead shares a story he claims to have found in Lucifer magazine, which describes a newly discovered plant in Nicaragua, which the native peoples call the Devil Snare. Here's the full account provided by Stead. Mr. Dunstan, naturalist who has recently returned from Central America where he spent nearly 2 years in the study of the flora and the fauna of the country, relates the findings of a singular growth in one of the swamps which surround the Great Lakes of Nicaragua. He was engaged in hunting for botanical and entomological specimens when he heard his dog cry out, as if in agony, from a distance. Running to the spot whence the animal's cries came, Mr. Dunstan found him enveloped in a perfect network of what seemed to be a fine rope, like tissue of roots and fibers. The plant, or vine, seemed composed entirely of bare interlacing stems, resembling more than anything else the branches of the weeping willow denuded of its foliage, but of a dark, nearly black hue, and covered with a thick, viscid gum that exuded from its pores. Drawing his knife, Mr. Dunstan endeavored to cut the animal free, but it was only with the greatest difficulty that he succeeded in severing the fleshy muscular fibers. To his horror and amazement, the naturalist then saw the dog's body was blood-stained, while the skin appeared to have been actually sucked or puckered in spots, and the animal staggered as if from exhaustion. In cutting the vine, the twigs curled like living, sinuous fingers about Mr. Dunstan's hand, and it required no slight force to free the member from its clinging grasp, which left the flesh red and blistered. The gum exuding from the vine was of a grayish-dark tinge, remarkably adhesive, and of a disagreeable animal odor. powerful and nauseating to inhale. The native servants who accompanied Mr. Dunstan manifested the greatest horror of the vine, which they called the Devil's Snare, and were full of stories of its death-dealing powers. He was able to discover very little about the nature of the plant, owing to the difficulty of handling it, for its grasp can only be torn away with the loss of skin and even flesh. But as near as Mr. Dunstan could ascertain, its power of suction is contained in a number of infinitesimal mouths or little suckers which, ordinarily closed, open for the reception of food. If the substance is animal, the blood is drawn off and the carcass or refuse then dropped, a lump of raw meat being thrown at it. In the short space of 5 minutes, the blood will be thoroughly drunk off and the mass thrown aside. Its veracity is almost beyond belief. There you have it. Are these accounts true? Could man-eating plants really exist? Or are these stories just an exercise in creative writing? I have a hard time believing the stories are completely made up. We do have Venus flytraps and pitcher plants and other carnivorous plants, but there are plenty of issues with some of these stories, though, like in the story of the man-eating tree in Madagascar. To this day, no tribe called Mkodo has been found, and that's just one of several inconsistencies. However, much of the world is still unexplored. Perhaps there are plants out there that were the basis for these stories. As of right now, the largest carnivorous plant that's been discovered is the giant montane pitcher plant of Borneo. It's so large that its pitcher is able to hold up to 3.5 liters of water. Scientists have even found evidence of it consuming small animals. It's large, but it's not eating people. Like I said, much of the world is still unexplored. Who knows what's out there in the deep, dark parts of the world's jungles? I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you have, please like and review the podcast and share it with your friends. Also, if you haven't yet, be sure to find us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. If you have a topic you would like to hear us cover or a story you would like shared on a future episode, you can learn how to contact me in the description. Until next time, I'm Easton Sanders, and this is Liminal Journeys.